One tight end that I do like this week is Tucker Kraft. Romeo Doubs is still in concussion protocol. Last 2 weeks, we've seen Kraft's involvement tick way up. 21 and 25% of the targets in those two games. He has 9 catches, 119 yards, and a touchdown. This game is pretty interesting. The Seattle-Green Bay game obviously has some avenues to shoot out. It's also a good schematic matchup for Kraft this week. Seattle is running too high safety coverages a lot more. They've run too high shell at least 56% of the time in 4 straight games, and that's going to leave the middle of the field open for Kraft. That's going to be really nice for him. Kraft is seeing a target on 20% of his routes against too high coverages with Jordan Love. That dips to just 12% against single high, so we've kind of seen a trend where Love, he's willing just to kind of take what the defense gives him underneath with Kraft. Against too high, like Kraft quite a bit this week.
What? Why are you shaking your head?
You're welcome.
It is week 15. Congratulations. Give yourself a pat on the back if you've made it this far. Maybe your playoffs are starting this week. Maybe your playoffs are starting next week. But this is the best 3 weeks of the NFL calendar, in my opinion. We have no buys. We have everybody up and ready to go. 16-game slates to close out the rest of the season, to claim some championship rings and get some glory. Welcome back. As always, we're going to be talking through the starts and sits that you kind of need to know as you're setting your lineups, going through this week, going through your prep for week 15. As always, we're going to be using the Fantasy Points projections led by our guy, Chris Wecht. Chris has been doing a phenomenal job, and he and the rest of the staff, including myself, Scott Barrett, Joe Dolan, Tom Brawley, Jake Tribby, Ryan Heath, all of us spend a ton of time working on these projections, kind of tweaking them, going through news from Wednesday up until kickoff. Make sure you're subscribed to the site, fantasypoints.com/plans. We're 80% off for the rest of the season to get the projections, get our bets, tail our props. John, Tom, myself, all of us have been crushing this season. And I write a free start sit article over on fantasypoints.com. You can always check that out for free. It kind of gives some color to the projections, lots of stats, lots of matchup points, lots of words. Make sure you're checking that out as well. Let's get to it with some quarterbacks. As we always do, we're going to start with quarterbacks. 16 games this week, so we've got a full slate of quarterbacks. You should not have a problem at all finding a decent quarterback that projects for, anywhere from like 17 to 18 points this week. Really good week at quarterback. I pulled out a few guys that I like just a little bit more than usual this week. The first one is Tua Tagovailoa. Miami's just completely ditched the run game. They've just not been able to run the ball all season as nearly as effectively as they did last year. And we've seen it over the last 5 games. The Dolphins are the 3rd most pass-heavy team by pass rate over expectation. Only the Bengals and Chiefs are more pass-heavy. And Tua is trailing only Joe Burrow and Jameis Winston in this span by pass attempts per game. So he is just getting loads and loads of volume. He's also been hyper-efficient, obviously not throwing the ball deep downfield much. I've been saying this all season. Basically, they're not attacking too high coverages at all anymore. It's just the dink and dunk stuff. Basically play turnover-free ball. It's a version of what Drew Brees did so well back in the day, but even though Saints offenses had a little more vertical element to it, even though, Tua has been great for fantasy though. The dink and dunk is working, last 5 games, averaging 300 yards per game, again, mostly based on volume, but the efficiency is still good, 7.7 yards per attempt, 12-to-1 touchdown to interception ratio. He's the QB5 by fantasy points per game in this span. He's finished as a top 10 scoring quarterback in 4 straight games. I see no reason not to go back to him in this spot. Seen him kind of low in some consensus rankings across the industry, which doesn't really make much sense to me. I think everybody's kind of been a little too slow to react to this new Miami offense. One other quarterback I like a little more this week than usual is Jared Goff. Goff has been an absolute roller coaster for fantasy this season. He's basically just gone as his touchdowns have gone. It basically just depends on if the Lions score like 40 and Montgomery and Gibbs only score 1 or 2 touchdowns, then Goff has a pretty good game. This game obviously has just massive shootout appeal. Last week, same thing. Liked Goff a little more than usual. Came through, finishes the QB5. All of his big spiked weeks this season have kind of been easy to point your finger at. Like, everybody loved him against the Jags. Last week was a pretty good spot to point at. This game total is 54.5. It's the highest of the 24 season. And, against the Bills, you know what you have to do. You got to beat too high coverages. Goff is really good, been really good against too high. He's just got so many different avenues to beat you. Either Amon-Ra over the middle, they're getting Laporta a little more involved. Obviously, Jameson Williams is a deep threat, who's big play waiting to happen. Goff has been great against too high this year. He has the second best passer rating at 118. Third best yards per pass attempt at 8.0, and he's the fourth best quarterback by fantasy points per dropback against too high. Why is that important this week? Well, the Bills play too high coverage 55% of the time, fourth most according to fantasy points data. In that game, I think Goff is probably one of the trickiest quarterbacks to kind of figure out every week, and I think he stands out to me as a really good play in a game where the Bills could definitely push the Lions this week. Guys, every time Drake Maye is on the slate, last week we didn't have him, so you guys didn't have to hear me talk about him. I'm going to keep pounding the table for Drake Maye. It makes absolutely no sense. You know what? I didn't check his ownership on Yahoo. I forgot to do that. Let me double check that while we're looking. Of course, obviously they're coming off the bye. Guys, Drake Maye is 87% available on Yahoo. Sure, it's around the same on ESPN. It makes no sense if you have been streaming, dying for a quarterback all season. Say maybe you drafted CJ Stroud. It hasn't gone well. I've been saying since he started, Drake Maye is one of the best, if not the best, streamer in fantasy football. True streamer in fantasy football. Like, you can grab him off of waiver wires everywhere. Across 7 full starts, Maye is averaging 18.7 fantasy points per game. For reference, that would make him the QB9. QB9 in fantasy points per game by 0.2 over Brock Purdy. Maye, again, terrific scrambler, 42 rushing yards per game on the ground. The Cardinals have really only faced 2 mobile quarterbacks all year, Josh Allen, Jaden Daniels. Both of those guys had good games on the ground. Allen had 39 yards and 2 scores. Daniel, 47 and 1. Obviously, game environment should be pretty good. Cardinals are 6-point favorites. They should push the Patriots to score. Once again, I still can't believe, Maye is this widely available for being this good. I think it's just like anti-Patriots bias kind of seeping in. Obviously the turnovers for Maye, he's got to clean that up. But like, if he cleans up the turnovers in the next couple of weeks, it could take him from being like a back-end streamer, quarterback 1, to like, 20-ish fantasy points per game. Could be a really good play to close out the rest of the season. One quarterback who has not been a good play basically all year is CJ Stroud. I've had him on the sit list for every week except for basically the last 2 when he got Nico Collins back, and he was still not good for fantasy. It's been more of the same. Stroud has not finished as a top 10 scoring quarterback in weekly output since week 5. Kind of reminds me of the stretch that Patrick Mahomes went through to close out last season and kind of to start this year. Mahomes only recently has picked it up a little bit. And Stroud last time out before the bye flopped again in a perfect matchup. It was a quarterback 23 with just 14 points against the Jags. Do like that game, but Joe Mixon has just been obviously taking the majority of the touchdowns when they get into the goal red zone and get near the goal line. Stroud could definitely score 18 or 19 in this spot and be fine, but ceiling has not been there for him this season. All right, we'll keep it moving to running back. As always, running back is absolutely loaded, even with some injury situations to kind of pick through. Last week, I came on here and was talking about how great the spot was for Seattle running back. It was Ken Walker. He ended up missing the game. Zach Charbonnet had the massive game. Charbonnet has basically been like the RB1 in fantasy football when he gets the starting role. By snaps, by percentage of team carries, and by production, he's the RB1. So if Walker's out again, like, Charbonnet is unquestionably at the top of the running back projections, followed by Bijan Robinson, Joe Mixon, Chuba Hubbard, Chase Brown, Saquon Barkley, Devon Achane, Derrick Henry. I threw James Conner and Josh Jacobs both into must start this week. That group right there, including Charbonnet, if he gets another start, looks like he probably will, are the must start group this week at running back. And then we have a really good, RB2 grouping. Lions running backs are always must start, high, low end RB1s. And then the RB2 groups, Rico Dowdle, a great spot against Panthers, even though they're 3-point dogs. Brian Robinson, and Aaron Jones, and Tony Pollard. Those are the best RB2 plays on the slate. We're obviously waiting on Bucky Irving and that whole situation with the Bucs. If Bucky is out, obviously Rachaad White basically becomes must start. For right now, I have him as a really good RB2. Irving is more of a flex if he's able to suit up. So let's go through the rest of their RB2 pile. It has been tough for Jonathan Taylor. This is another tough spot coming out of the bye here. Broncos, over the last 8 weeks, have been the best run defense in the NFL. They are really fun up front. They do a lot of fun stuff to kind of disguise and mix and match pressures, and they just fly around to the ball. They are only allowing 3.3 yards per carry over the last 8 weeks. Again, league low. And Taylor is basically forced to be a touchdown-dependent RB2 at this point. Richardson just doesn't check the ball down. He's either looking to throw deep or throw an incompletion. He's not looking to take the check down. Taylor has 10 targets, just 6 catches in 7 starts with Richardson this season. Taylor is, I think, a flex play this week, but he's still just a volume-based RB2 in this offense. What the hell do we do with Tyrone Tracy this week, guys? I mean, this Giants team total is egregious. 13.5 points. I think that's the lowest this season. It's one of the lowest we've seen in the last couple of seasons. And this game has, no weather concerns. Ravens are massive, massive favorites here. They're going to go back to DeVito. Baltimore is the ultimate pass funnel, meaning that they don't give up anything on the ground, but they give up a ton of production through the air. They allow just 3.4 yards per carry. That's second fewest. I'm just hanging my hat on the passing down production and the volume here. This is going to be the ultimate test of volume and winning championships, just chasing volume in fantasy. Tracy's he's a great player, in an awful offense this week. He's, at least ethered Devin Singletary again for the second time. Tracy's role is kind of, I'll say, up in the air a little bit there after those fumbles. He's gotten it back, though, balling out last couple of weeks. Tracy last week had an 84% snap share. Singletary just at 18%. I guess if you want to hang your hat on something here, Tommy DeVito made 1 start, targeted Tracy 4 times. He caught all 4 for 28 yards. Ravens do allow the 5th most receiving yards to running backs. I think Tracy, again, he's kind of fits into that RB2 flex pile like Jonathan Taylor does. James Cook also fits into this pile too. All 3 of these players project very similarly this week. We're kind of down-ish on these 3 guys. I think it kind of comes down to if you're just absolutely loaded, let's say you got Zach Charbonnet and Tyrone Tracy, and you're deciding between the 2, just stick with Charbonnet again this week. James Cook, if we exclude the Week 13 snow game, the Bills are basically right there with the Bengals in terms of their pass rate. 9.4 pass rate over expectation over their last 6 games. Again, that trails only the Bengals, 10%. And Cook's volume is just completely fallen by the wayside. He's averaging just 12.5 carries per game. Over his last 6, that would be 28th among running backs. And this is the worst matchup for opposing ground games. Lions are great against running backs, allowing just 2.9 yards per carry over the last 5 weeks. Not saying bench James Cook. Obviously, he has tremendous touchdown upside in this game. I am a little lower on him this week. DeAndre Swift is a sit. Again, I think this is the 3rd straight week I've listed him as a sit in my article. He's just playing injured. This Bears offensive line isn't moving anybody, and he gets another brutal matchup here. He's had 3 brutal matchups in a row. Vikings are allowing the 8th fewest yards per carry over the last 8 weeks. This Bears team total is 18.3 points. That's only 0.3 more than the Jags, led by Mac Jones, and the Saints, led by Jay Kaner or Spencer Rattler this week. Just not a good team total, not a good team outlook for Chicago. 2 other running back situations I want to talk through is this Jets group. Obviously, Breece Hall is injured. He has some sort of injury to the same knee he had surgery on a couple of years ago. Jets have been obviously very discreet about the severity of the issue. He's still not practicing. We're going to be back to the split between Braylon Allen and Isaiah Davis. I wasn't surprised that Isaiah Davis, 1, had the role he had last week, and 2, looked better than Braylon Allen. Davis was better by yards created per attempt than Braylon Allen. He's also better in the passing game. I don't know how much they're going to have to use these guys in the passing game this week, though. This game is obviously probably going to be close throughout. Jets should be able to run the ball. And the Jags, the Jags can't stop the pass, can't stop the run. They're giving up 149 rushing yards per game over the last 8 weeks. That's 4th most. I think both Braylon Allen and Isaiah Davis are right there in that flex pile. They're definitely a notch below, obviously the Tracys and JTs and James Cooks, and kind of tougher matchups. But those guys are definitely in play for flex decisions this week. One final running back I want to talk about. I think Sincere McCormick is a trap this week. Alex Madison should be back to take passing down work. Madison has missed the last 3 weeks with an ankle injury. However, he returned to full practice on Wednesday and Thursday. I definitely believe Antonio Pierce when he says they want to get McCormick the rock more. He's certainly earned it. He's been their best running back they've had all season by far. But Madison will get some passing down work. McCormick has been barely involved in the passing game. Raiders are still, I think, 4-point road home dogs against the Falcons. This version of the Falcons, with Kirk Cousins throwing all these picks. Maybe McCormick gets a goal line carry and that looks silly, but I think this backfield is still one to avoid. All right, let's move on to receiver. You're obviously not benching Terry McLaurin no matter what. I do think this week stands out to me as one of the best outlooks he's had, in a very long time. Obviously, Jaden Daniels is fully healthy, coming back off the bye. He looked phenomenal in their last 2 games before the bye after suffering that ribs chest injury. The big news here is the Commanders are not going to have Noah Brown for at least this week, maybe next week, maybe for the rest of the season. He had to have some sort of kidney operation, and it's going to condense Washington's target share around McLaurin and Zach Ertz. Before Noah Brown became a full-time player, Terry McLaurin had 26% of the team's targets in weeks 1 through 5. From that point on, it was really close, y'all. McLaurin had 18% of the targets. Brown was at 17%. And like I said, this couldn't come at a better time. Jaden Daniels is finally healthy. Obviously, the Commanders are pushing for the playoffs in the NFC. And this is a great matchup. Saints have allowed the 4th most yards per game to opposing outside wide receivers at 123. So Scary Terry, I think this is the first week all season I've had him, or maybe the second week I've had him as a must-start player. Scary Terry should be in your lineups everywhere this week. He stood out as a really, really good play among wide receiver 2s this week. Same with DeAndre Hopkins. Hopkins hasn't been anything special by any means since joining the Chiefs. He's been okay. Wide receiver 23 by PPR points per game since week 9. 28 grabs, 328 yards, 4 touchdowns. The good news here is that at least the Chiefs have kind of come to their senses and started playing Hopkins more. 64% of the routes over the last 2 weeks. Chiefs have obviously been more of a rotation. They kind of don't care about the regular season. They're trying to get their guys healthy for the postseason, keep all their guys healthy for the postseason. But Hopkins is playing more, and this is a great matchup. Hopkins is averaging 2.7 yards per route run against single high safety coverages with Mahomes. It's really solid. 2.7 yards per route run for his age against single high, really good. It dips to 1.1 against 2 high. It's massive, massive drop off. Why is that important this week? Well, Cleveland plays the 2nd most single high safety coverage at 64%. They don't really deviate from that either. They just play what they play. They leave Denzel Ward on an island. And, even though Ward's playing better, I don't think this is a matchup to be afraid of at all. DeAndre Hopkins definitely stood out to me a little bit more. In the same game, opposite side of the ball here, I'm contractually obligated to mention the Jameis Winston scam every single week. I absolutely love him for fantasy football. He is just the man, Volume's amazing. He generates a ton of possessions for both teams because he makes mistakes, gets the ball back to the other team, speeds up games, generates more points. Jameis has been a top 12 scoring quarterback in 4 of 6 starts. Obviously, he didn't do it against the Steelers in that snow globe game. He had a bad game against the Chargers, but by hook or by crook, man, he always gets it done. And I like Elijah Moore a lot this week. David Njoku is going to miss this game with a hamstring injury. We'll talk through tight ends here in a little bit. But Njoku's out this week, tweaked his hammy. This was already an amazing matchup for Elijah Moore. Last 8 weeks, no defense has given up more schedule-adjusted fantasy points per game above average to slot receivers and the Chiefs at 5.6. And Moore's been solid. We were talking about it last week. He didn't come through for us last week. But, with Njoku out, Tillman hasn't played in a couple of weeks with his concussion. And I like Elijah Moore again as a wide receiver 3. Let's talk through some receivers we're kind of out on for this week. We kind of nailed the Devonta Smith thing last week. Like, he was fine in half PPR. He got you 11 to 12 points with that touchdown, but he only had 4 grabs, 37 yards, and a touchdown. This is just what this offense is, guys. Like, we keep trying to make this Eagles offense, this passing offense, something that it's not in fantasy. The volume has just never been there. Been saying this for weeks. AJ Brown is like the wide receiver 35 by targets per game. It's even worse for the Devonta Smith. Since week 6, the Eagles lead all teams in run rate over expectation. And in that span, Devonta Smith is averaging 4.6 targets per game. I mean, Jalen Hurts is playing all right, but that's just not enough volume in any offense with any quarterback. And this is a tough matchup. Pittsburgh is really good against slot receivers, allowing just 1.5 yards per route run. That's third fewest. And the fourth fewest schedule adjusted fantasy points per game to slot receivers. Smith is once again just a low volume wide receiver 3, more like a wide receiver 4. Same with Tank Dell. I'm out on Tank Dell again this week. I gave it a shot as a flex play against the Jags. He's been on my sit list for a while. I'm going back to it, Hill. I mean, it's just Stroud hasn't played well enough. Stroud has a 72% catchable throw rate. That's 35th among 42 quarterbacks, according to our fantasy points data. And, it's just it's not good enough to sustain Collins and Dell. It's not enough. Collins gets, obviously, the majority of the first 3 targets. Dell is a secondary option. And by fantasy points per game, Dell is the wide receiver 59. Tank Dell. Michael Pittman is the final receiver I'm pretty concerned about this week. Obviously, the bye week probably did him some favors. He's been dealing with his back injury all season. This should be the healthiest he's been all year, but hey, congratulations. It's the healthiest you've been all year, and you get to face shadow coverage from Patrick Surtain. Congratulations. No thank you. Volume is a massive concern with Pittman. This Anthony Richardson offense is just super run heavy. They're very slow. They don't like to run a ton of plays. They like to drain the clock. And Pittman is averaging just 4.8 catchable targets per game. That's wide receiver 37 with Richardson. In that same vein, Josh Downs doesn't have the matchup concerns that Pittman has. Maybe he'll get it done that way, but the volume it's a huge concern. Downs is averaging just 3.8 catchable targets per game. That's wide receiver 53. That's not going to cut it either. I'm pretty concerned about him too. I mean, Downs was averaging 8.2, again, catchable targets per game. We have the luxury here at Fantasy Points Data to be able to splice this out to look at just catchable targets. It's a good measure of not just raw volume that receivers are seizing, but also like the quality of that volume. And Downs, at 8.2 catchable targets per game with Flacco, that would be third most behind Neighbors and Jamar Chase. Unbelievable. I'm benching Downs. I have him in a few leagues. You guys know Josh Downs was my boy. The volume has just not been there for the Colts, and Richardson's obviously been highly, highly up and down. That'll wrap it up for receiver. We'll move it on to tight end this week. I think you guys know by this point, the must-start players: McBride, Bowers, Kittle, Kelsey. I didn't put Jonnu as a must-start this week only because the matchup is tough. Texans are giving up the third or fourth fewest yards per game to tight ends, but Jonnu is basically a must-start. From that point on, we have like a massive fall off in the projections. No other tight end is above 12. It's a lot of sameness. So let's sort through that sameness. One player I am pretty much out on at this point is Evan Engram. He's also injured, didn't practice. He's got this shoulder injury. He might not play this week. The volume has been fine with Engram, but his average up to target has fallen to 5.4 yards down the field with Mac Jones. That's sixth lowest among tight ends. Obviously, the Jags need a miracle to get in the red zone, so the end zone targets haven't been there. Engram has 22 catches, 142 yards, no touchdowns. He's a tight end 16 by fantasy points per game in Mac Jones' starts. I will also continue to be lower on TJ Hockenson. I was out on Hockenson last week. Just same reasons I'm out on him this week. It's the Jordan Addison and Justin Jefferson show. By first three target share, those two are just dominating the targets. It's kind of the same effect that we saw with Sam Laporta to a slightly lesser extent to start the season with the Lions. It's like, when you just got two players that are just dominating targets to the degree that Addison and Jefferson are, and not just before last week, it's been an ongoing thing. Addison has 17% or more of the targets, I believe, in 5 straight or 5 of his last 6. Josh Oliver did return last week, but only ran 15% of the routes. It's definitely a concern that Hockenson was a full-time player, still didn't get targeted last week. Obviously, he went off against the Bears in his last matchup, but I still think Hockenson is slightly overprojected. Okay. One tight end that I do like this week is Tucker Kraft. Romeo Doubs is still in concussion protocol. Last 2 weeks, we've seen Kraft's involvement tick way up. 21 and 25% of the targets in those 2 games. He has 9 catches, 119 yards, and a touchdown. This game is pretty interesting. This Seattle-Green Bay game obviously has some avenues to shoot out. It's also a good schematic matchup for Kraft this week. Seattle is running 2 high safety coverages a lot more. They've run 2 high shell at least 56% of the time in 4 straight games, and that's going to leave the middle of the field open for Kraft. That's going to be really nice for him. Kraft is seeing a target on 20% of his routes against 2 high coverages with Jordan Love. That dips to just 12% against single high, so we've kind of seen a trend where Love, he's willing just to kind of take what the defense gives him underneath with Kraft. Against 2 high, like Kraft quite a bit this week. 2 tight ends, if you need a streamer, you maybe don't have David Njoku, maybe you have Evan Engram and you're sick of it. Well, these 2 guys are kind of Evan Engram adjacent. It's kind of funny. Hunter Henry is always on the board as a potential streaming option. Again, it's the Patriots bias. He's available in 57% of Yahoo leagues coming out of their bye. He's been fine. He's boring. I get it. It's Zach Ertz-esque. It's Evan Engram-esque. But, Henry, he's just kind of gotten it done. 47 targets, team high in Maye's starts. He's the tight end 7 by fantasy points per game. Henry is consistently involved. I think we can at least know that you're not going to get a 0 with Henry. He has at least 18% of the targets in 5 of his last 6 games. One other tight end we nailed last week was Pat Freiermuth. Obviously came through with a touchdown. He's come to life with 13 grabs, 175 yards, 2 touchdowns over his last 3 games, caught 13 of 14 targets from Russell Wilson in that span. George Pickens is likely out again, which just kind of nukes this whole Steelers passing offense, to be honest with you. Obviously, Russ can't stretch the field like he wants to without Pickens. The Eagles are going to have Mike Williams and Calvin Austin and Van Jefferson in shackles on the outside. Those guys are going to be locked down, put away the key. Eagles are allowing negative 12 schedule-adjusted fantasy points per game below average over the last 8 weeks. They're just middle of pack against tight ends. The volume might be a little better for Freiermuth. He's available, and I think it was 40% of Yahoo leagues. So if you need a streamer, Freiermuth has come to life a little bit. He'll get you a few targets. Guys, that's going to do it for me. Thanks so much for hanging out. Week 15 is obviously a crucial one, so really appreciate you guys taking the advice from me, from FantasyPoints. If you could be so kind to leave a like on this video, comment down below, and if you aren't already subscribed to this channel, we have pushed over 13,000 subscribers. We are trying to get to 15,000 by the end of the year. And I will be live with John Hansen and Tom Browley on Sunday morning at 11 a.m. Eastern time, answering all of your questions here on YouTube on our Final Points live stream. Until then, good luck in Week 15. We'll see you at the top of the leaderboards.